Today's topic is going to be elbow extension in the handstand, specifically understanding why your elbows have a tendency to bend in your handstand, what to do about it, and how to build habits to overall get your elbows straighter. Now, I do have a video from a few years ago that talks about how to restore and improve your elbow extension. That's more from a physical capacity. What I want to talk about in this video is specifically how to improve that for handstands, because sometimes it is a physical issue, and I'll talk about that later on, where it's maybe flexibility is holding you back, either of your shoulders or wrists. Sometimes people's elbows don't fully extend because of a structural issue or a past injury, things like that. But a lot of times it's technical. It's not that people can't straighten their elbows, it's that they don't understand the specific technique and feeling of how and why to do that, and the difference that it can make in your overall technique. So I'll go into a bit of the theory and then we'll go into some practice. So first question is, why would you want to straighten your arms in your handstand in the first place? Well, I'm going to make a parallel to standing on your feet. So when you stand, typically your knees are extended. Not necessarily locked out. I'm not going to go into the semantics of all of that because that's a different story, but my knees are extended. When my knees are extended and I stand upright with a vertical line of force, what happens is that I don't have to use a lot of muscle to stand up. I'm not completely relaxed, of course. There is some muscular effort, but my body is mostly relaxed because it's the skeleton that's doing the work. Like my quads, for example, are completely loose right now because my knees are extended. What's the benefit of this? When I stand with this technique, I can stand for many hours at a time because it doesn't use a lot of physical force. And when I save energy, I can do more advanced standing techniques, like standing on one leg, like jumping and landing, all of this kind of stuff that come from that skeletal structure. So when you bend your arms in a handstand, first of all, it's a lot more precise. So if I bend my knees a little bit, my legs are strong enough that it doesn't make that much difference. When you bend your arms a little bit, that technique is magnified, so it's a lot more physical effort. But imagine if I stood like this. My knees are slightly bent. When I walk, my quads have to fire really hard. It's not that I can't stand or walk like this, it's that number one, it takes a lot more strength. Number two, I can't do this for very long. I can't walk like this for more than a few minutes because my legs are going to burn out, but I can walk with an extended knee for hours. So this is the same idea that you want to have in your handstand. You want to, as much as possible, utilize the body's bone structure because it makes the skill easier to perform, and then it makes it easier to move on to more advanced skills, whether you want to do handstand walking, handstand press, handstand push-ups, one-arm handstand especially. That extension is very important to understand. So why, right? Why do you bend your elbows in a handstand? And again, it could be your wrist flexibility, that could be a factor. Shoulder flexibility could be a factor as one example. So if somebody has tight lats, they have trouble extending their arm overhead this way, the elbows are going to try to bend that way. If somebody has tight pecs, same thing, it's going to get here, the elbows bent to compensate. If somebody has trouble getting that 90-degree wrist extension that I've talked about in previous videos, same thing, the elbows bend to shift weight into the heel of the hand and take pressure off the wrist. So these are natural responses to potential physical, trying to find the word, potential physical attributes that you could improve. But let's say it's not a factor. Let's say you have decent shoulder flexibility, your elbows can straighten when you're not in a handstand. So one of the reasons people bend is because it's safer. It's safer to balance like this. When I stand with my legs extended, I'm teeter-tottering. It's a very risky balance. I have, of course, enough precision in my balance that I can hold it, but it's actually more difficult to stand like this. It takes more precision because you have a higher center of gravity. If you were to knock me over, it's a lot easier to knock me over when I stand like this compared to when I stand like this. So that's the trade-off, and that's a lot of the reason why people bend their elbows. Is it dips into their strength, but it's a little bit more safety with balance, with kicking. You're less likely to fall. It's generally a way to make the technique easier, but there is a sacrifice. So it's a very intuitive thing to do. Even if you have the shoulder flexibility and the wrist flexibility and the elbow extension, It's very natural to bend the elbows to compensate because the technique of extending the arms, as I mentioned, it's not intuitive. It's not a natural thing to do. It's something that you're going to have to specifically train. And if you've already built that habit of bending the elbows, you just have to be very vigilant on maintaining that focus on what the elbows are doing. So I'll go into exercises, but I think it's always good to know a little bit of the theory of why do your elbows bend. And as I mentioned, sometimes it's a physical issue, but a lot of times it's not. A lot of times it has more to do with your actual technique and awareness and what you're trying to compensate for. So first order of business is just to test your elbow extension, not in a handstand, not on the floor, not upside down. Just how straight do your arms go? Look at them. You can look at them in front of you or in the mirror. Just straighten your arms as much as you can and see what that's like. That's not going to be the same for everyone. Some people have hyperextension. Some people don't extend all the way. And again, that could be for a number of reasons. But just how straight can you get your arms? You might have uneven, right? You might have one arm that goes straighter than the other. That's life. We're not always symmetrical. But just figure that out. So next, we're going to try to do the same thing overhead. You're going to take the arms above your head, but you're going to focus on maintaining the elbow extension because now we're getting into, is flexibility an issue? If your arms have a tendency to do this, then there's a good chance that improving your shoulder flexibility will also be beneficial for your handstand practice. But yeah, just straight elbows here. You can do it against a wall if you want. This is like classic alignment drill where my back is flat, so there's no space between my back and the wall. I straighten my arms and I try to keep my arms completely straight, completely vertical as I lift them up. That's a good test. And again, if this is something like that starts to happen or you start to lose your rib cage, then it's a factor of your shoulder flexibility potentially. It's never a solid answer, but it might be something that you could work on. But yeah, that's always the first thing. Figure out what it is, and then next we're gonna do the same thing in a push-up position. And then we're gonna do the same thing on the floor. So just, again, testing the elbow extension. And I even like to do it here, so on the knees, extend the arms and try to keep the arms extended as you put the weight into them. So we can go here, we can go push-up position, and it's, again, the same question. Can you maintain the same elbow extension with the weight on the hands? Usually in the push-up position, it's not an issue, right, until we get vertical, until we get up to the handstand. But it's important because what you're trying to do is maintain that same sensation of straightening your arms in the push-up position, and you're trying to apply it to when you get upside down, when it is more complicated. So push-up position, hold it, running out of space, and then we can do the same thing walking up into kind of like a, this is more of a press handstand for me. It's not really a downward dog, but if you look at the elbows, it's the same thing. I have the arms vertical to the floor, so I'm not leaning back to my feet. I have the weight in my hands, and I'm really focusing on maintaining that extension. It's not a natural position, so like I mentioned, you're going to have to train it specifically until it becomes the habit. If you're completely new, you actually have a benefit there because you can train the right position from the get-go if you have enough knowledge and good coaching. If not, if you have a habit of bending, you just have to be really vigilant and focus on straightening the same elbow extension from my push-up to my overhead position. I'm really focusing on maintaining that straight, and that's something that we're going to want to do before we get into the handstand, because I'll get into the psychology and the technique a little bit more. But if you can do that here, you have the potential to do it in a handstand, but the handstand adds a couple other variables that might make it more complex. So next order of business is basically to go from standing. Imagine like you're going to go very slowly into a kick to handstand. I reach my hands, now I straighten the elbows before I shift the weight into my hands, and I maintain that extension. I shift the weight, I come back. So it's not even a kick to handstand, but it's control, going slow and really making sure that I'm vigilant to not go here. Don't even let yourself do that. Reach straight, hold it really straight. Next factor, you're going to add a little bit of a mini hop. The point here is not to get into handstand. The point here is to do the scissor kick, maintaining the weight in the hands and focusing on maintaining the push and the straight elbows. So the handstand here isn't important. If you hit one, great, but it's more about maintaining this and really focusing on that so it becomes the habit. Very important to go slow and take these steps. So I have the weight of my foot, hands on the floor, then weight in the hands, then I'll give it a beat, and then I'll kick. So it's like in that preparation, I'll give it just an extra thought, an extra intention of keeping the elbows straight. A lot of the reason that people start to bend is, number one, is just not enough precision. They go too fast, they kick too much, they don't kick enough. They're trying to dampen the force instead of being as precise as possible, and going slow really helps with that. Being upside down, again, I'm closer to the floor, so it's safer. But when I do that, it takes a lot more strength, and I'm breaking that physical structure. So it's a really simple drill. It's not like it's anything new. It's not like it's a crazy concept. You're basically just doing the basics very slowly, but specifically focusing on that one factor of the elbows. So when you start to feel confident with these scissor kicks and weight shifts, you can start to do the same thing and hitting the full handstand and kicking higher. Just remember, so you have a higher center of gravity when your arms are straight, which means that you have to be more precise with your kicks. So one way to think about it, a lot of times people bend their arms because they're not really sure how much to kick. So it's just a way to control it when the main factor is precision. Sometimes people bend their arms because they're not confident balancing with that high of a center of gravity and using only the wrist and fingers to balance. So this gives you a bit of elbow and shoulder balance. So that's a bend because of a lack of confidence of balancing, and these are technical factors. Now sometimes here's another factor, right? If somebody tends to lean forward in the shoulders like this, it's a lot of pressure on the wrist. So naturally the arms bend to take some of that pressure away. And again, these are all factors that have very little to do with your actual physical capacity. It has to do more with your technique and how you approach it. So that next step, find your space, same idea, go slow, break it down, take a beat. If you're still not sure of the technique, going slower is going to give you more awareness, and it's going to give you more time to focus on the right things. When you do it enough times, it becomes a new habit, it becomes a lot easier, you don't have to think about it as much. So I'm reaching, put the hands down, put weight into the hands, kick, legs together, come down. The handstand here really doesn't matter that much. What matters is that I'm focusing on keeping the elbows straight. It's that specific intention. If you let yourself do this, if you catch yourself, you have to give yourself a little bit of punishment and go back a step. So if you move too fast, too soon, you start to go into those habits again, just go back a step. Weight into the hands, hold for a second. Come back, hold for a second. And my recommendation, generally until you really get used to it, is not to do it all in one movement, is to take that breath, to take that beat, and figure out what's your goal for that particular set. So hands down, weight in the hands, one breath, and then kick. And that's going to help you understand a little bit better how to keep the elbows locked out. And really, you can do the same idea with any other skill, whether it's a wall handstand, same thing. Take a moment. As I kick, I don't let my elbows dip. If I dip, that's a really common thing I see a lot of the time on the wall as well. I just go back a step. Take a moment, elbows, and focusing on the elbows throughout the way up. Again, if it's a habit, you're going to do it naturally, so you have to be very aware when you do it, and then you have to be doubly aware to try to fix it and build a new habit. If you're really vigilant on this, it's not going to take that long, quite honestly, to fix it, because you'll get used to it. But If you just do the same thing over and over again without the proper intention, it's not really going to help. So that's the most important thing, and that's kind of the solution. And it's not really what a lot of people want to hear, but it's not that there's going to be a specific exercise that's going to help you straighten your elbows. It's about taking care of your flexibility and your physical capacity, but also basically breaking down the basics to a level that you can understand them and figure out and develop those specific techniques and sensations and awareness that you need. So yeah, basically that's what it comes down to, is understand the elbow extension, understand what it feels like for you to get your elbows all the way extended. Try to maintain that as you get your arms vertical, as you get your body upside down. Try to maintain that as you add the momentum of the kick, and be aware of it until it becomes the new sensation. And as I mentioned, it's not wrong to bend the elbows, and actually, when I see people doing that, it's good because they're actually figuring out how to balance for themselves. They're trying to figure out that balance sensation and rearranging the body and making the necessary compensations to hit the balance, which I think is a great thing. But ultimately, depending on what your standards are, you want to improve the technique to be able to get the basics precise to a point that you can do more, you can do harder skills. Straight elbows is going to be a huge factor for that, because that's going to have a really big carryover to any of your basic handstand holds, handstand walks, press handstand, stalder press, planche, and especially one-arm handstand if that's on your list of aspirations. But yeah, we can do, right, same thing here. I'm doing my walks, but I'm focusing on the extension through the elbows, right? You can do these guys, but quite honestly, the elbow dipping and straightening, I wouldn't even include that for this kind of training, because that's more about fixing your balance after you're already up. What I want to do here is just make it the habit that when you naturally go into your kick or whatever handstand, you're already locked out and you don't have to put any additional thought into it. So conclusion, this is kind of my first thought when somebody has that concern, when somebody wants to ask, my elbow is bent in the handstand, what can I do? Kind of a dick response, and I try not to say it specifically like that, but my first thought is, have you tried deliberately focusing on keeping the elbows straight, right? Because the question is, like we said before, why are they bending? Is it because the arms don't straighten? That's going to be a much different kind of training and compensation than if it's because your shoulders lack flexibility. That's going to be a much different compensation than if you don't understand the vertical line of force in a handstand. And that's going to be a very different method of training than if it's just modifying the technique to build the awareness to be able to keep everything straight. So something to think about, but that would be always the first order of business for me, is technique first. How do we fix the technique? Because the technique, if it's done right, and it's not always something that can be achieved, but sometimes technique can be fixed very quickly, like in one day. If you just change the way, you tweak the way somebody does something, can be a much quicker fix than a physical attribute, building strength and flexibility. That doesn't happen in one day. That takes time. So think of it from a technical standpoint, see what you can fix there, break it down, go slow, lose the ego as much as possible, because that's generally how it's going to work with the progression, especially with handstand. You have to go slow, and you have to realize that it's not going to be a linear journey. And if you try to rush, you're probably building some kind of habits that aren't helping you for the long term. So just a couple thoughts on how to improve your elbow extension in your handstand without going into the physical. Got a siren, fantastic. Without going into the physical elements. So hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it helps. Let me know if you have any questions, and let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see. This video is brought to you by Try the World. This is a monthly subscription box that has all kinds of different snacks and foods from many different countries around the world, so you get a taste of all kind of different international cuisine. We got tikka masala corn chips, we got some tom yum rice noodle ramen, we got dried mangoes, we got halva, we got truffles, we got some oat cookies, We got some watermelon gummy candies. We got some cacao mint soda. So it's different every month. It's all kind of different stuff. So this is Try the World if you want to snack on some international fare. You can get a discount using the code below.